Good morning, everybody. Chester RP Church Devotional Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a second. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to pick up. We finished Romans yesterday, moving our way to the Old Testament, and I think we'll pick up some small stories that are somewhat prophetic, but also are real stories. And so I'm going to turn our attention to the story of Jonah first, then we'll move backwards in the Old Testament, maybe to the story of Ruth and Esther, and then perhaps Nehemiah and Ezra as well. I think those are cool stories. They have prophetic messages for us, and I think encouraging to us. But Jonah chapter 1, I'm going to start with Jonah 1. Let's go through verse 6. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it, to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great storm or great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had laid down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise and call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. Jonah, of course, probably a familiar story to many of us, but if you're new to the Bible, it's the story of a prophet. God says to this man, Jonah, who is the son of Amittai, I want you to get up and I want you to go to the city of Nineveh. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and it is a very, very important city in the day in which Jonah lived. And God says to Jonah, I want you to get up and I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to call out against that great city, for their evil has come up before me. You see, the God of the Bible is a God who is righteous in his very essence, in his very being. Righteous means he is good and true and just in every way. And when his creation does not honor his righteousness and does not live out righteousness, it bothers him, it angers him, it frustrates him. And so God says to Jonah, I want you as a member of my people. The Old Testament Israelites were called by God to be a testimony to what it meant to live in relationship with God and a reflection of God's character on this earth, much like the Christian church today is supposed to be. We are called by God's grace to be a testimony to his grace, to his goodness, to his glory, and we are also called to be a reflection of his character on this earth. And so God says to Jonah, a man of Israel, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell those people in Nineveh what they are doing is wrong. What they are doing is inappropriate. Their sin, their rebellion, their refusal to acknowledge me, their refusal to follow my will for their lives has come up to me. And I am not happy about it, and I want you to go warn them that destruction is on its way if they do not turn and repent and come back to me. And so he sends Jonah to Nineveh to do that. Jonah, however, says, I don't want to go to Nineveh. He doesn't want to go to the enemy. The Ninevites, the Assyrians, were the enemy of God's people Israel at this time, and he says, I don't want to go there. Besides that, the Assyrians are a rough and brutal group of people. And so out of fear, out of disdain for the Ninevites, out of fear and for his own life, and perhaps out of simply a desire to not do what God's called him to do, a desire to do his own thing, Jonah gets up and goes down to Joppa. He goes, and specifically we're told, he goes from before the face of the Lord. And God's face was on him and saying, I want you to go to Nineveh. He turns and goes the opposite direction. And when we rebel against God, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian this morning, when we rebel against God and we don't do what God has called us to do, we literally walk away from his face. His face has been turned upon us, we turn and decide to go away from where he is. And so Jonah is basically saying, I would rather go away from your presence and leave your presence and get away from you and from your watching hands of mercy and grace over my life. I would rather do all of that to get away from that than to do what you've called me to do. I'd rather go away from where you are than to go where you told me to go while you watched me. That's a stark statement. And ultimately, Jonah is a representative of God's people Israel in this particular story as well, because they chose to go away from God rather than to be with him and follow him where he would have them go. Just a challenge to us this morning as we think about our own lives. Maybe you're struggling with faith. Maybe you're not a Christian. Maybe you are a Christian, been going for a long time as a follower of Jesus, and the temptation is there to go in a different direction because God's laid a burden on your heart. Don't do it. Don't do it. Storms will certainly be in your future, and they will come as a result of God, because he will restore his will and he will get his people to serve him, to do what he would call them to do. So don't do it. Stay in the presence of God. It's always good to be in the face of God, never good to be outside of his face, outside of his gaze. You guys have a great day. Be encouraged in the Lord, be strengthened, but also be convicted to turn and follow him. See you soon.